Fucking shit. Yeah. Okay. Oh.
And now your Dormez-vous Weather Center forecast. Sunny today with some clouds rolling in later and a high of 5. Rain tonight with temperatures getting to 10 by morning. And that rain will end tomorrow afternoon as we get to a high of 11 degrees. It's 1 degree in Montreal right now. For all the news during the day, stream us on your smart speaker. Just say play CJAD 800. Your next CTV News update is coming at 11:30.
Great talk and good company every morning. Elias Mackos, CJAD 800.
Welcome back, David Hertel in for Elias. Well, a lot going on this morning. We talked about public workers strike. We talked about immigration, Post Saint Pierre Plamondon, reacting to the immigration level announcement from the Legault government last week, saying that this would generate major social unrest. 50,000 immigrants a year, major social unrest. And
Yeah,
on
how
top
many
of
are we
that,
already
we
taking?
have our City of Montreal top executives, the head of the executive committee, the chair, Dominique Olivier, who ran for years the Office de Consultation Publique de Montréal,
No idea.
up until she got elected to council in 2021. Reports in the Journal de Montréal last few days showing that they went out on the taxpayers' dime. Big fancy trips, big fancy dinners. Shows a bit of a problem that the Plante administration is going to have to react to. Even this morning, speaking with Jimmy Zubris on the Big Five, he had a bit of trouble defending Dominique Olivier's behavior when she ran the Office de Consultation Publique de Montréal. We'll see what comes from this. But overall, I mean, there's a lot of you called in and texted about the teacher strike and the public sector strike in general. And I want to say that, yes, that it's a lot of money. I mean, if we're going to put teachers on par with their counterparts across Canada, it's going to mean more than 15%. But from my perspective, when you look at the Quebec government, the fact is that the government has two core businesses.
Fucking us over?
Which is over half of its budget, and education, which is close to a third of the budget. Think about that. The Quebec government spends roughly $110 billion a year right now on us. And
sure,
basically 80% of it is healthcare and education. That's what the Quebec government does. With the other 25%, roughly speaking, you got to take care of all the rest. Economic development, justice, environment.
Oh, you mean like Parks Canada?
You name it.
All the parking tickets and...
So we are coming up on a time where on the healthcare side, the largest population ever, baby boomers, a lot of you listening right now are of that great generation.
Great generation? You mean the one that's fucking up for everybody else?
Truth, but the fact is that healthcare speaking, you're entering into a period where the healthcare costs are going to rise. There's going to be more pressure on the system, which is already crumbling under the current pressure.
Can't even.
On the education side, we're seeing people that have left, have retired, and current teachers.
Oh, we're getting
are leaving
Secretary
the
Marie to
profession in
substitute
droves
teachers.
because of the current conditions. Salary, the class sizes, special needs children that are rolled into regular classes, not enough support. The status of the schools themselves are in a terrible state of disrepair. I mean, the percentage of schools in disrepair in the province in the last 5 years of the Legault administration, 59% in 2018 were in a state of disrepair, and now it's 61%. So we have to look at this from a perspective that education and healthcare are the basis of our society. And
Oh,
this
you
is
meaning
why we
if
have
you
the
don't put
system
your
we
kid
have.
in the education system, you get your kid taken away and
And
you get sent to jail?
When you look at the economic side of this,
Even though they're like,
we
oh, you get to
have
homeschool your kid during
develop an
COVID.
economy that can support and generate the necessary tax dollars so we can pay our teachers, pay our nurses, and support these two fundamental systems. Because if we don't invest in education, not only are we paying the price today, but we're going to pay the price in 15, 20, 25 years to come, where we won't have the skilled workforce necessary to generate the jobs and the revenues needed.
Or stop being
to
so
keep the
racist.
Quebec
Maybe try
model
that.
going. And that's fundamental. And when I hear François Legault and the Legault administration, and Immigration Minister Christine Fréchette saying, oh, we can only take in 56,000 immigrants. That's all we can do. And then you have PQ leader Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon saying, if we do even that, 56,000 immigrants, well, there's going to be a severe social crisis in Quebec. That's political parties represented currently, if you look at the current polling, 56% of the Quebec population that has a negative view on immigration and sees it as a problem. Well, I'll have news for you. The answer for the shortages in healthcare and education is more immigration. The problem is not the levels. The problem is the energy, the resources, and the money we're not putting into integrating more immigrants. And that's the federal government's fault, the incompetence of the Trudeau government since 2015 in putting the resources and modernizing our
Fucking this, why
immigration
doesn't this guy become our fucking prime
And
minister?
it
Because
is
he seems to know the
also
fucking answers.
the responsibility of
Winner,
the
winner,
Legault
chicken dinner
government
over here.
that since 2018 has been saying that immigration is a problem. Remember, Jean Boulet, the current labor minister of Quebec, former immigration minister of Quebec, said in 2022, not 1952, said in 2022, immigrants, people that are coming into Quebec, all go to Montreal and they don't want to work and don't want to learn French. And then we have a Legault government that is raising tuitions for foreign students.
I can't even. I
that are
fucking
a
can't.
key economic contributor to our development.
Sir, can you just say it?
We're shooting ourselves
They
perpetually
are
in the foot.
Racist.
We need the
Racist.
revenues. And why do you think Michael Sabia laid out this ambitious electric development plan from now until 2035? Because that's the only way we can raise the revenues
That's fine.
to pay for the type of society we've gotten used to.
I like that.
So if we keep hitting and shooting ourselves in the foot, like the Legault administration's decision on tuition fees for foreign students, like immigration, where all economic groups, all industrial groups are saying to just get by, we need to raise immigration levels to 70,000, 80,000, and 90,000 a year. For the lowest of the low political imperatives, you have the Legault government and the Parti Québécois trying to yet again
Yeah, full shit.
create a wedge issue on the immigrants' back.
Yeah.
And
That's
This
not the
is
issue.
the
It's
downward spiral. This is
Oh, yeah.
contributing to the downward spiral
Yeah.
that is creating the basic decay of Quebec.
Yeah.
Look at the way the healthcare system
Not
is
because
performing.
people don't
We're
want to
not
come
heading
here
in
and
the right
they don't
direction
want to
after
speak
5
French.
years of
They
Legault government.
out of it, like
We're
they
not heading in the right direction
just
on
like me.
education.
I genuinely tried
With the
my
Legault government.
utmost hardest to learn
That's
French,
80% of our budget.
and it got to the
80% of
point
our
where the
provincial
more I
taxes.
tried, the less cooperative French people would
So
be
we
with me.
have to look at real solutions. And what's really troubling in all of this
And I couldn't
is,
for fucking the life of
well,
me understand it. I was
the
like,
party
maybe
that
I just,
should be scoring points
I'm
right
pretty
now, the
smart in
Liberals,
most
are
subjects,
nowhere to
but
be
maybe
seen in
French
that.
is just something that like my
They're
brain
waiting
just
till
doesn't get,
2025 to find a leader.
or
This is the
like
time
maybe I'm
now
just like
before
stupid and I'm
public
just like
opinion
not
in
registering like
rural Quebec,
how to learn it right.
in the
I don't
major
know.
centers,
But as it turns
parties
out, it has
will
nothing to do with
continue
me.
to see immigration as a problem.
That's
I'm
the
telling you,
point.
this is part of the
They
solution. If
teach
we
you
don't invest
Parisian, so they
in
know that
education
you're
and
not
healthcare
French.
now, we are preparing a very, very dire situation for Quebec in the near and long-term future.
They're doing it themselves.
After we check on your drive, we'll be joined by Dr. Christopher Labos. But first,
Honestly, at this point, I'm on the separatist side. Go ahead, separate.
Here again is Debbie Marcellus.
First of all, I'd love to see you get taken over.
Major incident at
How
the La
fast you
Fontaine
get
Tunnel
taken
toward
over.
Montreal. On the Montreal side, at Sherbrooke, an accident involving 2 trucks. We have emergency vehicles.
And
on
second of
the
all,
scene.
that
Cars
means
are not
that
getting
I
through,
can
and
get the
it's
fuck
backing
out
up
of here
traffic
because you
to
guys
the
won't let me
south shore
fucking
from
leave.
Montagneville. Also seeing delays now on the 132 eastbound from before Jean-Paul Vincent. It is the route to avoid La Fontaine Tunnel toward Montreal. There's accident blocking all the lanes. Plus, we have a stalled vehicle in the tunnel blocking one out of the 2 lanes. And so the other South Shore spans are all moving well. Expect delays heading toward the South Shore at La Fontaine because of ongoing roadwork in the tunnel. Traffic is from Yves Prévost. Get 30,000 PC Optimum points
even
when
know
you
what that
spend
is.
$100 or more on cosmetics at Pharmaprix today. That's $30 in value. Offer valid in-store and online. Let us know what you see on the roads. Call in your tips to Star 800. Your next report at 11:30.
Thank you, Debbie. Home for the Holidays is back with $8,000 to bring loved ones home from anywhere in the world. Head to CJD800.com and tell us who you would like to bring home and why it would make your holidays extra happy. Starting next week, Andrew Carter calls daily qualifiers with $100 cash. One grand prize winner will get the holiday they'll remember forever.
This fall, make sure your vehicle is protected from rust by booking an appointment at rustproofing.com. Metropolitan Rustproofing, a smart investment that really pays.
Econo Fitness has been raising the bar in Quebec for 10 years already. If you join before December 1st, you're in for a chance to win one of 10 travel credits valued at $1,500. All details at econofitness.ca.
Imagine a world without traffic, where all roads are open to adventure. Now imagine a world where adventure is what you decide, where everything is under control, and where comfort never outweighs performance. The 2024 Honda CR-V. Legendary reliability with standard heated front seats and remote starter. Plus, available all-wheel drive, and this year, 2 trims available in hybrid. The real world of Honda. Test drive the 2024 CR-V at your Quebec Honda dealer today.
Elevate your home and transform your space with C&M Textiles. Discover a world of endless possibilities with their exquisite fabrics, state-of-the-art motorized blinds, customized window treatments, and more. Visit one of their 4 showrooms and start creating your dream home, office, or event space. With bespoke products that not only provide privacy and light control, but also reflect your individuality, bring your vision to life, one room at a time. Shop now. C&M Textiles. Do it once, do it right. CMTextiles.com.
Sleeves up, it's time for your annual flu shot. Book your flu shot appointment at pharmaprix.ca/flu. It's easy, so book your flu shot appointment today. Subject to vaccine availability. Age limitations apply.
Talking to your mechanic should be simple.
Yeah, so it's
going maybe and
I hate you people.
We've gotta streamline these ideas. We need Grammarly.
I've got your back.
When you remain in one of these relationships or you remain in contact, you have to remind yourself. You almost have to hit yourself in the head and say, oh, that's right, this is toxic, especially on the good days, and how much the hope is like a narcotic that makes your judgment hazy. So let me start with this. Have you ever been in a narcissistic relationship or watched someone in a narcissistic relationship that all seem to hedge on the someday, right? Or on promises that are made or a future that's being suggested, not happening now, down the road. And that this is a relationship that isn't all that great, but it's all about that someday. Things will be easier someday when we are married, or when we have a bigger house, or when we finish school, or we get another car, or I go into therapy, you go into therapy, we go into therapy. Someday, things are going to be better. Now, many relationships out there could be somewhat tweaked to a better direction if some things just switched up. More money, or an easier commute, or more childcare. That's true. But when the relationship itself is not healthy, lacks respect, lacks compassion, or lacks kindness, balance, support, empathy, no future event, no bag of money will ever make that relationship better. The future faked relationship is a type of narcissistic relationship that all hinges on that someday in the future after something happens. Now, there are two variations of the future faked relationship. The first is the version where the narcissistic person is chronically future faking the other person. Not an uncommon dynamic, right? But in this relationship, the narcissist is skillful at making exactly the right promise, and in fact, leaving you envisioning the someday better, that someday down the road. You can see the life that they're dangling. And yes, while they're dangling this life, they're still validating you, gaslighting you, manipulating you, all that stuff happens too. But they're putting out there that future you want, or a life that looks like you want. When you are in a future-based relationship, your head is actually not in the game. It's a game of someday, down the road. In a way, you aren't in a relationship with a person. You're in a relationship with a false promise, and the other person created that. When you raise issues about the future deliverables, the narcissist may say things like, I'm stressed now, but I won't be stressed down the road. Things will get better. That's a heck of a promise, and so you hold on. What the future faker in the future faked relationship is saying may also be plausible. You may be able to believe that the someday will turn up. For example, you may be students or you've just started a new job. So the younger that you are, the more likely the future faked relationship seems believable. But I have witnessed people into their 60s and 70s get into relationships that were largely future faked relationships as well. The foundation of the future faked relationship is the narrative of what is to come and how the change will come, but just not today. You just need to be patient. People in future faked relationships will find that they're often being asked to be patient, which can be really challenging when there's no backstop. You may have to make a bet with 3, 4, 5, or even more years of your life to find it out. So the future faked relationship can feel like you're playing freeze tag, and you get frozen for a moment or for a lot longer than a moment while you wait for the time to pass, endure their ongoing bad behavior, hold out for that future faked outcome, and then the promised benchmark never quite arrives. Then there is the second part of the future faked relationship. That is basically the self-gaslighted gambit that the person in the relationship plays with themselves. It's not that you fall for the future fake as much as you make bargains with yourself, such as you say to yourself, down the road, it'll get better, he will get the job, she will move out of her parents' house, and then things will get better. So for now, I'm not going to say anything because I'm just making too much of a fuss about something. I'm putting pressure on him or pressure on them. and it'll get better once that other thing changes. Now, it's not going to get better because you're dealing with someone narcissistic. It's going to stay the same. People in narcissistic relationships, and certainly definitely future fake relationships, are often self-soothing themselves in terms of how they talk to themselves. This is going to get better. This is going to get easier. Everything's going to be fine. You're often trying to walk yourself through the mess that is this relationship by talking your way through it. And some of that means you keep saying it will get better, it will get better. You're sort of tragically future faking yourself, which is really a maintenance of the false hope that keeps so many people stuck in future fake relationships. The future fake relationship can be painful to witness. To watch a person saying, next time, next week, next year, it'll be better. Future fake relationships clearly have a strong trauma-bonded subtext to them, with people holding back on voicing their needs and justifying the relationship to themselves and everyone else and hoping that next time it will have a different ending. People sort of who are the observers of the future fake relationship will want to say, oh no, you did not. Really? Did you think it was going to be different this time? And sadly, over time, people stuck in future fake relationships may find that people are burning out on listening to them, making them subsequently more isolated. I think of future fake relationships as bad investments. You put lots of resources into them and wait, thinking that the yield will be good in the long term.
I think Bitcoin.
The future fake narcissistic relationship is like buying real estate in a swampland or investing in a VCR company. It will not only not pay out, you are going to lose your money. But in this kind of a narcissistic relationship, the future fake relationship, where all of the hope is placed on something in the future and convincing yourself it will happen, or the narcissist convincing you it will happen, while the narcissistic person keeps buying time with those future promises, is the signature of the future fake relationship. Break out of this cycle by using the data from the past instead of selling yourself short or buying a fake story about the future. So when we talk about these different kinds of types of narcissistic relationships, this future fake relationship is really the one where the person is almost thinking, well, when we get to that point in the future, that's going to be the relationship I want to be in. Definitely the relationship a person's in now, not so good. But the idea that that relationship down the line is going to be great is exactly what the future fake relationship is. And it is, again, a subset of a narcissistic relationship where a person is enduring all of the usual narcissistic abuse, but are pinning it to a point in the future. And their happiness to a point in the future, I should say. So I hope that helps. You understand, those of you who are in future fake relationships, you might say, yep, if all those things that were being promised came through, this would be exactly the relationship I want. It's never going to be that relationship.
It is not the messenger that is important, it is the message.
We were taught to be afraid of it. It is a perfectly natural part of everything around us.
Everything is here and now. Everything is all connected.
When we start to wake up, we remember there's something bigger than ourselves.
Switch to Chrome to help protect yourself from malware. Less worrying, more surfing. Fast, safe, yours. Get Chrome.
Make your decisions accordingly. You know about those narcissistic relationships you can't break out of because they're just sort of structurally like marriage or work, and there's lots of rules and expectations around them? Those are the ones we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about this idea of the structural narcissistic relationship. Relationships last a lifetime because they are embedded into a structure. Marriage or long-term committed relationship with children, family, business, or community/social connection. And these may be some of the most problematic Because the narcissistic person derives their power from the social capital you will lose or the shame you might incur if you try to leave the relationship or you actually leave the relationship. These structural relationships, the structural narcissistic relationships, they're the ones that are the most sticky. It can be about legal issues, custody, finances. That's what makes these ones hard to break out of, but also culture and stigma. And frankly, a person may just not be able to afford to quit working or get out of a business partnership without it costing a fortune or losing years of work. And don't underestimate the narcissistic people that lurk in social spaces like religious communities, neighborhood groups, local politics, even homeowner associations. That's honestly its own video. I have seen people go to the edge of narcissistic madness as part of homeowner organizations, like if you live in a condo or something.
Yeah.
The narcissist is able to lie, cheat, and deceive without thinking or caring because they don't care. They've projected all of their shame onto you. So they are just fine with their bad behavior and they have no empathy. So these structural relationships actually work for them. They do what they want. And if they do not want the relationship to end, it often doesn't, because it really does take fortitude or even massive to walk away from a long-term relationship or family or workplace. And it may even be, in some cases, be relatively perilous for people. The narcissistic people count on the captive audience that these structural relationships bring. Narcissists are not only very controlling, they're also very rejection sensitive, and they struggle with abandonment issues. So if they do finally leave a relationship, they almost always have their plan B already set up. So it doesn't feel so abandonment-y for them, right? They already have a new set up to receive them and give them validation and a place that they can regulate themselves. That whole plan B model, that is a narcissistic person to go around to. These structural narcissistic relationships are tough because they bring up so many issues. Some folks desperately want out and can't see an easy out. They can't afford the divorce, or they feel that sense of stigma around things like family estrangement. The complicated part about families, especially large families, is that you may actually like a few people in your family system, and most people aren't willing to blow it all up. In addition, I still think estrangement in a family is still viewed through a lens of public judgment and shaming, especially if a person in a conversation says they're estranged from some or all of their family. Although we are witnessing more acceptance of estrangement and why it happens, it still remains a societal taboo. And the person who is accepting or even wants the estrangement, often because of narcissistic abuse, is the one who is often viewed more suspiciously. So if you are the one who goes no contact, you are viewed as the problem, not the other way around. The thing that I loathe about these codified and structured narcissistic relationships like marriage is that they are often the ones that keep people the most stuck, the most shamed, the most trauma bonded, and the most enabled. So?
Don't buy another boring gift this Christmas. Try this weird new tool instead. It makes home projects up to 90% faster by working in the most bizarre way possible. My wife got it for me, and at first, I thought it looked kind of crazy.
What do you do? As I think more about healing for survivors, I recognize that people need the tools to heal, even if they stay in a relationship. It's a tough balancing act because it means lots of radical acceptance, awareness of trauma-bonded patterns, setting massive boundaries with enablers, almost as massive as the boundaries that we need to set with the narcissistic folks, and breaking out of the hope cycle. When you remain in one of these relationships or you remain in contact, you have to remind yourself, you almost have to hit yourself in the head and say, oh, that's right, this is toxic, especially on the good days, and how much the hope is like a narcotic that makes your judgment hazy. It's not easy because just being exposed to the ongoing narcissistic abuse in these relationships means that you are constantly hearing and experiencing terrible stuff. But these structural relationships mean we have to constantly remain aware of not blaming ourselves. These structural relationships fall for a lot of justification. People don't want to go through the headache of a divorce or be single again or not disrupt their children's lives. So they justify the behavior until they are shut. People don't like the idea of not having control or to miss out on a sense of belonging or on family events. So they tell themselves that all families have issues. Trust me, not like this. Narcissistic family systems are special circles of hell. I've witnessed families with just issues, and I've witnessed narcissistic families. There is a difference. People don't want to mess up long-term careers, mess up insurance benefits, or lose pensions or retirement funds, or obviously a salary, especially if you work in an industry that you've worked in for a long time, or worked a long time to succeed in, or had to get a lot of education to be in, or that it's just hard to break into. People will frame and justify these settings and the toxic relationships themselves as just being, a difficult hazing ritual, or the nature of having a demanding boss. Community groups, religious groups, these are also tough, especially, for example, if you're a person of faith who likes being part of that kind of a community, and yet a destructural part of the narcissism means you don't want to get out because you believe in something. This can all be really pronounced if you live in a small town or a more isolated area where these groups may be the only game in town, and without them, you stand the risk of becoming very lonely and isolated. People like belonging to something, even if it is a toxic relationship.
I just don't get it.
So these structural relationships can have some real staying power. I have witnessed people on the back end of dismantling these structural relationships. For example, horrible, expensive divorces, financial woes from workplace disruptions, and working within civil courts and painful distancing from families. And it is not easy. So these relationships represent a double bind of damned if you stay and damned if you leave. Many folks in these structural, codified, narcissistic relationships often opt to stay because it is easier than the anguish and the logistics, honestly, and the dismantling involved in leaving. I understand, I really do. But if you do stay, that means you need to commit to not blaming yourself for another person's toxic behavior, radical acceptance, and recognizing that it's not going to change. These structural narcissistic relationships are tough, and for many folks who clear out a lot of other toxic people in their lives, these are the ones that often stick around and can really make things difficult.
Once everything's perfectly organized, I'll start working on my thesis.
Grammarly will ensure you feel confident nailing your final thesis by supporting your writing journey from start to finish. Welcome to Ideation Station.
How do I write the perfect intro paragraph?
You start with understanding what makes a perfect intro.
Now we know this, not everyone can leave a narcissistic relationship. Money, children, culture, you know the drill, right? So people stay. Not everyone who is in one of these tolerator relationships actually understands narcissism. Sometimes the person doesn't have any clue with what narcissism is, but still creates a tolerator relationship. And I sometimes wonder if people in this situation may not have ever learned what narcissism is, and maybe better, but they finally understood that nothing they do is making this relationship better. They can't or won't get out, so they just tolerate it. And that's what a tolerator relationship is. You just tolerate what's happening in this relationship. Some tolerator relationships are a throwback to generations past. when divorce was very stigmatized, so people stuck it out in awful marriages with narcissistic folks. They would just tolerate the unempathic, invalidating, dismissive, manipulative, dreadful behavior and slowly sort of lose themselves. This sort of group of people who have life force sucked out of them by their narcissistic relationships in some ways can almost look like the women patients Freud worked on, worked with and wrote about, or even sort of the hollowed out housewives of the 1950s. The tolerating in these relationships came out of not having any options. It may not have been a good thing, and these were often long-suffering folks in this relationship who just sort of over time learned to become numb, helpless, and almost dissociated from what the other person really is. I have witnessed it with folks I know and have worked with, and it is not pretty. Tolerating a tolerated relationship is not what happens when you engage in radical acceptance, because tolerance, when you're in a tolerating relationship, there's a sort of passivity you have in this relationship. People who radically accept, that's not a passive process. It's an active process characterized by awareness that permeates you. It's an active disengagement. It's a concerted effort to break out of self-blame cycles by knowing that this person will never change and then to embrace self-compassion, right? People within family systems have these sorts of tolerating relationships as well. Sometimes because they may not need to see the family members as often, so they may be able to tolerate for short sprints and then sort of live their lives away from the family member more often than not. But the longer and more extended the contact with the family members who you think you have a tolerating relationship with, the more of a toll it takes. Now, sadly, in some ways, the tolerators need to be almost a little enabling to stay in the relationship, because even as other people may be noticing that your relationship is terrible, or you even notice that you don't like how the narcissistic person is treating you, the person in a tolerator relationship may find themselves making excuses or just sort of anemically saying, oh, what can I do? It's who they are. I get it, because the tolerators are in a terrible situation that they're trying to endure, and then they don't have an easy way out. Tolerating relationships can be observed in close relationships or marriages, but also in adult children of narcissist family members and in colleagues. There is still so often so little recourse against toxic colleagues. So people may feel as though they just have to put up and may just spend their time drawing angry doodles during those fucking meetings. Maybe that's just me. And they tolerate because you recognize that given the limitations of the workplace, you sure as hell aren't going to be able to do much other than either quit the job or hope that the narcissistic person quits first. So you tolerate. I actually think that a really large proportion of narcissistic relationships are tolerating relationships. There isn't much to be done. They won't change. We can't always get out of them. And in some cases, there are lower impact narcissistic relationships we have in our lives where we just tolerate because the contact isn't often enough to make that big a change around it. But there can be such regret in the tolerating relationship. To be in a tolerating relationship can really bring up grief with the idea of, is this as good as it gets? Or is this all that life is? The only offset to being in a tolerating narcissistic relationship
You also get to find
is
people
to
that
have
are awesome.
other parts of your life that are more empathic and compassionate and loving and kind. Those spaces become places of rejuvenation.
Yeah.
The tolerating narcissistic relationship in some ways is what we have become socialized to do. Put up and
Shut up.
shut. If you are
seen,
in
not
a
heard.
tolerating narcissistic relationship, please get out there and find other spaces, callings, interests, anything to be an offset to this empty relational space. I know that one of the great challenges of narcissistic abuse is how many people are stuck. The tolerators can tolerate, but have to remember to not self-blame, to learn to disengage, to not think, and find ways to bring some color and richness into the
Because there are people in this world who think
I
you're
do
awesome.
sometimes wonder if most of us don't have at least one tolerated relationship. The problem is we do take a toll on it. This is a recap. The tolerated relationship is that relationship where you just sort of kind of put up with it. You don't try to change it. You don't really engage that much. You sometimes make excuses for it, but you just tolerate it. You certainly don't. I mean, again, in a way, you might be thinking, what's the difference between this and radical acceptance? The tolerators are feel a bit more passive and helpless, as though this is my fate, this is my life. The radical acceptors are like, yeah, this isn't going to change, so I'm going to actually take some real action in my life in other places, recognizing that this person's never going to come around. In some ways, the tolerators, it's not that they're waiting for the narcissist to come around, but it's rather that the tolerator is almost like I can only liken them to like a person marching with a soldier with their head down and just sort of trying to push themselves through the day and just enduring this thing that they're in.
To whom it may concern. When I came to Canada, I wasn't able to find a job with the prior experience I
You know
had.
what? I was born in Canada. I have job experience. I still can't
So
find
I
a job.
completed a Google
So
Career certificate, and the job search that was once difficult
you and me both, girl.
opportunity. And given the chance,
And that's what that those tolerated relationships are like. We could call the euphorically recalled relationship. Some of you may be in this relationship, some of you know people who are, but you know this relationship. The folks who say, wow, we had such a good time on that vacation in Europe, or we built that business together and had all those late nights eating takeout and building our dreams, or our first date lasted 12 hours, or we spent every morning making pancakes that spelled words, or remember we laid in bed until 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. And then you look up and you realize that the person is talking about things that happened 10 or 20 years ago. But the way they're talking about it, it's as though all of these fun, charming, comforting, passionate things happened recently. With the euphorically recalled relationships, all I can say is heaven bless these folks. I sometimes wonder if these relationships are the byproduct of the relationship coaching industry or the gratitude folks who tell people to just go and find all those sunshiny bits of your relationship and focus on those instead of the toxic, abusive, manipulated, gaslighted nightmare that your relationship has become. I actually think it's kind of a cruel thing to do to someone in a toxic relationship because it feels blameless. But then it's your fault for not seeing the good stuff, right? And the euphoric recall folks may just be Pollyannas who are stuck in a terrible situation. But when we look at this euphorically recalled relationship, there are a few things that are happening in this type of relationship. First, the euphorically recalled relationship may just be simple trauma bondage justification. We have such fun. We have such a nice life. 6 months ago, we had a good day, that kind of thing. And if there was some early good love bombing, then there are those memories to fall back on. The euphorically recalled relationship often has some good structural bones, meaning like maybe a nice house or a decent routine, that there are some bells and whistles around the relationship that can allow people to keep practicing denial and compartmentalization and keep talking about the good stuff. If you have been in a euphorically recalled relationship, you may remember that you would just want it to work, justify it. Maybe this euphoric recall pattern is a lifelong pattern. You were really good at justifying a narcissistic parent's behavior and were able to find a way to tell a story about how happy your childhood was. And so you would just ignore the bad, focus on the good, and keep crafting that narrative. Now, the second way that folks get to the euphorically recalled relationship is something I call the enough good days model. In fact, this euphorically recalled relationship style could actually be called the enough good days relationship. This is what we see too often, enough good days to keep a person in the relationship, enough bad days to question yourself. And folks in these euphoric recall relationships will focus on the enough good days to say, we took a nice walk this morning. We made dinner over the weekend. Nice things, but psychologically speaking, not enough to rationalize being emotionally abused and invalidated on a regular basis. Now, third is what I already hinted at, the existing rhetoric about relationships, to find the little things to be grateful for, to tell them something, to tell your narcissistic partner something you're grateful for every day, to journal about all the stuff you're grateful for in this relationship. It's all perfectly fine stuff to do in a healthy relationship. But in a narcissistic relationship, as far as I'm concerned, this is stuff that turns a person in one of these relationships almost into their own abuser, right? Forcing yourself to proclaim gratitude to someone who's doing so much harm, and then feeling silent about talking about the toxic stuff because they're afraid of being raged at if they do point out that stuff. There are all kinds of folks out there who want to give out, again, that pithy advice of all relationships are difficult. The work is to just find those things you love about a person. Listen, if a relationship is healthy, you don't really have to work at this. The things to be grateful for are many and manifest. And you may need to calibrate a little and not take a good person for good. We are all doing it. But when I see the couples and the relationships out there that are healthy in that work, the gratitude just happens. It doesn't have to be performed. The euphorically recalled relationship may just be you trying to convince yourself that this relationship's okay. To say that you're having fun, and didn't we all have fun, and aren't we happy? Say that enough times, and you may just believe it. The trying to convince yourself gets risky because you start to lose yourself and deny parts of yourself to make it work. You keep recalling the early stuff, the good stuff, to keep the ship afloat. But as you do that, more and more holes are popping up in the hull of the ship, and you are taking on water. I sort of view the euphorically recalled narcissistic relationship as a person walking through the ruins of a crumbled down house they lived in and picking out the few good things that remain, a picture, a dish, a fork, a piece of clothing, and saying, see, there's still some good things here. It's heartbreaking to witness that, and it can really get people stuck in bad situations. The euphorically recalled narcissistic relationship can be confusing for the people around you because they're hearing from you that everything's good, you're happy, all's good in the relationship, it's all good, right? And that may mean when things really start getting toxic and fall apart, and they will, that you may actually feel that you don't have support or can't rally support because folks heard you talking about all the good stuff that happened. They may even see that the relationship doesn't look healthy, and yet you are pitching it as a treasure trove of good memories. So the people around you are confused, and people in the euphorically recalled relationships may actually feel embarrassed when they have to explain how bad things really were. In short, the euphorically recalled narcissistic relationship is a trauma-bonded manifestation, often made worse by the zeal of the world for everyone to be gratitude seekers and positivity mavens, even when a person is in a toxic mess. Folks in these relationships may feel blindsided because when everything falls apart or the betrayal can't be unseen, there can still be a risk of looking backward and remembering what happened. It takes folks who are in these relationships a minute to finally recognize that there is no fun dinner or vacation or house that can make up for invalidation, manipulation, and abuse. So the euphorically recalled relationship is in many ways sort of it's that surprise for many people who say, they've been saying they're so happy, and now they're not together anymore, and they're really being open about what happened. There's a real danger because the danger of this relationship is that the person keeps pulling on these old memories they had of this relationship, talking about a trip 20 years ago as though it was yesterday. it keeps the person in proximity to a toxic situation that day in and day out is taking a toll on them. And I'm sorry, I don't buy this idea that this person can sort of stoically keep their spine strong and stay in something. I think what happens more often, that is in the midst of that stoicism, that euphoric recall, everything's great. I gotta tell you, these great things just happened, and they didn't just happen. There runs a real risk of a person falling into a place of physical and mental health issues from being exposed to such a toxic situation. You were in this kind of relationship I'm about to talk about until you weren't. Okay? So in this relationship, everything's fine. Everything's good. We're good. You would go to bed confused as hell, replaying conversations in your mind, but really you told yourself, oh, this is just marriage. This is just relationship. This is just how families are. Some days, every so often, you have one of those crises of confidence. But on most days, you just soldier through, and everything was fine. This is the denial-based narcissistic relationship. There are so many reasons for this denial-based kind of narcissistic relationship. One could be a person is surrounded by other narcissistic relationships. And obviously, if everything around you is a certain way, then it's almost impossible to discern that this kind of relationship is an issue. Or it could be that there's a person who's an enabler in one of these relationships and they just want to maintain the status quo. Or a person who really literally doesn't know that narcissism is a thing. Or a person who doesn't want to believe that narcissism is a thing. And I have encountered these people, and some of them are even people I know. And they've said things to me like, okay, Ramani, I get that this is what you do for a living, but this really isn't a thing, and you're just bitter about stuff that happened to you. Really? Needless to say, my boundaries have gone up with those people. But I am sure you know or have been this kind of person, right? It's a bit of a riff on the Pollyanna of it all. Like, this isn't a thing, right? Now, these kinds of denial-based relationships may exist for cultural reasons. And again, back to that idea of wanting to maintain the status quo of toxic relationships, and many other people in your family system or your community may be in these kinds of relationships. And again, the culture sort of supports them. So it becomes a sort of collective denial. Everybody's in it. Now, the denial-based narcissistic relationship actually accounts for a large proportion of narcissistic relationships. In fact, many people currently in these kinds of relationships, well, I don't think they'll be watching this video because, frankly, they don't think or may not want to think that anything is wrong in their relationship. But they may have their dark nights of the soul when they are confused as hell and may stumble into this very YouTube channel late at night as they try to make sense of it, and then the next day go back to denial. Now, one of the greatest challenges of relationships in general, and not just narcissistic relationships, is that many people love the idea of a relationship they are in, the idea of a family, and have a vision of what they wish it and hope or want it to be, and will break their hearts to try to make it look the way they want it to. They will organize everyone for that perfect holiday picture, or the Mother's Day brunch, or the family vacation, and it will be a sheer misery. Everyone complaining and gaslighting and manipulating, but that person who loves the idea of it all will fight to make it work until their heart breaks. They desperately want it to look the way they want a family to look. And so when the people within that family are treating them badly, they will just engage in denial. Because at least the idea can stay afloat. Now, under those circumstances, acknowledgement of narcissism is messy. It means not just acknowledging that a partner is narcissistic, but also that they will never change. The holiday picture will always be a smiling semi-fiction. The holiday dinners are tolerated with seething contempt under the surface. The vacation is a sort of psychological lost weekend where everyone was miserable. Ultimately, the denial type relationship is about cognitive dissonance, trying to make the pieces fit, justifying and rationalizing and denying everything's fine, we're good, everything's great. A sort of fake Instagram narrative of family happiness, while this person in the relationship is actually shrinking into a shell of themselves because of the relationship. It's actually quite sad. The person in this relationship is trying so hard and are getting so hurt that they just start to get hollowed out. A few months ago, I talked with someone about a denial type relationship. Super sweet wife, very narcissistic husband. So he's self-righteous and communal with some top notes of vulnerable narcissism sprinkled on top. 2 kids, adult kids, one narcissistic, one very anxious. The mother just wanted happy. She just wanted happy little vacations and happy family portraits and happy meals together. Not happy meals, happy meals, like the happiest meal together, right? She just wanted cuddle time on the couch with her husband, just to be a little bit cherished and desired and loved. She didn't need or want much beyond that. She just wanted them all to get along and to not be invalidated. Not okay. It was impossible to get through to this woman because she was so entrenched in this denial distortion for a variety of reasons, but would have these troughs of sadness in her life when things would get so bad in these relationships, but she still couldn't or wouldn't understand the narcissism part. She would just cry about what was wrong in the relationship. So even when the dots were being connected by yours truly, nope, she couldn't hear it. She's a really nice person, but she's in a denial relationship. As I said, there are lots of relationships like this. What ends up pushing them to the tipping point? Who knows? Sometimes it's
Physical abuse.
infidelity, financial abuse. The narcissistic person themselves may leave one day. Maybe there's really bad public behavior. Someone else may be saying something to them. Children get older. In some cases, it's just a straw and a camel's back scenario.
Physical abuse.
Being invisible just gets to be too much. Something I'm hoping for.
No, it went from verbal abuse to mental abuse, and I'm not sticking around when it escalates to physical abuse. Like, I don't fucking deserve that shit at all. Like, I can take everything else, that's fine, but like, when you start being a grown man that's trying to hit me and trying to fight me, I'm out. I don't fuck around with that. Like, I'm a little girl, like, not a little girl, but like, I'm a small statured person. I have 0 fighting experience. Like, if a grown ass man hits me, I'm on the ground. And if they're big enough, they can potentially kill me. But I don't just let people beat me up, and I don't just fucking roll over and take it. So if we're gonna throw down, we're gonna throw down. But like, I try to avoid those situations as much as humanly possible, obviously.
You'll get there when the time is right. Recognizing it is a huge first step. Now, things I'd suggest include journaling, watching the patterns in the relationship, getting into therapy, preparing for grief, understanding your own relationship history before you, as well as family history, learning about cognitive dissonance, and above all else, recognize that this isn't your fault. Wanting to be happy is not a bad thing, but denial can be dangerous. Hope that explains that kind of relationship. And if any of you are in that kind of relationship or have been, drop it in the comments. Thanks again.
Ooh.
It feels wonderful to be desired. It feels amazing to have an attraction and intense chemistry with somebody when it's with the right person. So how do we actually create the love juice known as oxytocin?
So there's a few ways we could look at this, and when I speak about this normally just in a sciencey way,
I basically say that the hormone oxytocin correlates with our feelings of bonding, and the main ways of getting that into your life are through physical touch mostly. So hugging, kissing, cuddling, handshaking, stroking, and then, you know, if you're lonely, if you're not in partnership, self-massage, going for a massage, having a warm bath. So anything that makes you like physically feel warm and have skin-to-skin contact. Eye contact also does it, but to a lesser extent. Laughing together induces oxytocin too. And, you know, let's state the obvious, when we have sex, we release a lot of oxytocin. Fun fact for you, women release oxytocin whenever they have sex. Men release testosterone whenever they have sex, but only oxytocin if they're in love with the woman.
Oh my God. Why is that?
It's an evolutionary mechanism, but it's the explanation for the fact that if a woman sleeps with a man enough times, she's going to start falling in love. Whereas for a man, it's not necessarily going to happen. And, you know, that is the basis of so many relationship
Very
issues.
interesting.
You've heard it before. Let's keep it casual, but we are having sex. And, the woman kind of thinks, at some point he's going to change his mind and we're going to be in a relationship. But if that's what the guy's told you from the start, physiologically, chemically, it's not going to change for him. It's more of a decision for a man to say, okay, maybe I want to settle down with this woman and like be in love with her and like
very
nest
interesting
kind of thing. And then, you know, they can start like letting the effects of oxytocin have an impact on them. And this, I never talk about hard wiring, I talk about soft wiring. So something that's parallel to that we know about is in history, like far back, like in the cave, people weren't monogamous, and men would have children with multiple women. And this was really because just passing on your genes was the most important thing. For quite a long time now, most societies have asked us to live in a unit family. So be monogamous, have children with one other person. And what we've seen literally only in the last 5, not even 10 years, is that dads' brains are getting rewired by oxytocin. So when a man becomes a dad for the first time, his oxytocin levels increase in a burst and make him bond with the baby more rather than want to compete with the baby through testosterone. And actually their testosterone levels drop. And if the baby sleeps in the same room as you, the man's testosterone levels drop even further. So they become much more cuddly and bonded, and they want to stay at home and be with the baby. They don't want to go out hunting, to work basically, or leave you and look for another.
Interesting.
They want to stay as part of that family.
Really?
So we do know that our behavior can change some of our wiring, but it takes millennia. And currently, that status of how much women bond with someone that they have sex with and how much men do, that hasn't really changed since we lived in the cave. Men have 17 times as much testosterone as women circulating during a day. So if you think of it like a seesaw, for us, we don't have much testosterone, but like having an orgasm
Shut
is so much
the fuck up.
It really overrides the testosterone and makes you just want to bond. But proportionally, the testosterone levels are so high that even if there's oxytocin around, because you have been cuddling and you have been having skin-to-skin contact, and you are fond of each other, but that actual falling
The secret to raising good men is lesbians.
the threshold is just totally different. And that's why I always, if you watch reality shows or, you listen to your friends who are single, it's that, you just hear it over and over again. This is casual, we're not in a relationship. And if those are the words that are being spoken to you, you need to listen to them. Because in this case, the words are overriding the actions, even if the person's having sex with you. But I always say these things work in three ways. So there's the words that are spoken, the body language or the physical actions, and that's also eye contact and facial expressions, and then hormones. And so obviously if a man, says, I love you, I only want to be with you, I want to marry.
Want strong teeth? Help your body replenish vital minerals with Pronamel Mineral Boost.
For you, and the actions go along with that, then the hormones are there. But if they're not saying that, because the hormones aren't there, then whatever actions you're carrying out it's not strong enough of those three to make that turn to a different outcome.
So let's say you're going on a date.
You're talking about baby
So
making.
you laugh together. That would be a great way for you guys to really bond.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I've never thought of that one before. And so the emotions that correlate with oxytocin and bonding are joy, excitement, love, and trust. So, and this is very individual. I can't tell you or our listeners what brings you joy. You know, if you can work out by journaling or something, what brings you joy? What makes you excited? What motivates you to get out of bed in the morning? What do you love? And, you know, how does your trust threshold work? And then equally, if you can do that for your partner or, you know, the person that you're trying to date, understand what brings them joy and motivates them, etc., then that's a very powerful basis, you know, upon which to start. And so also understanding that on the opposite end of the spectrum, the things that break down bonding and relationship are fear, anger, disgust, contempt, shaming, guilt. So we want to avoid those, you know, inducing those sorts of emotions. And then there's a really interesting one in the middle, which is surprise. So that can tip you one way or the other. And the best examples of that are watching a horror movie where you don't know if you're going to like scream or laugh in the next millisecond, or being at the top of a roller coaster where you're kind of like exhilarated but also like feel sick and terrified. So in real life, doing something surprising can either move you from fear to trust or trust to fear. And when I say fear, I mean that circle of emotions like anger, disgust, shame, whatever. And so surprise can be used, you know, very tactically. It can even be used in the bedroom. I mean, if you think about the fact that if you suddenly introduce an element or behave a different way in the bedroom than you have previously in the relationship, that could be a really good thing, right? But equally, if that comes as a bit of a unexpected shock to your partner, that could actually ruin the moment. So it's kind of like that.
So what's happening? You said trust. What's happening to the brain then that trust is a way of developing oxytocin?
I think that one, most things work both ways round, but I would say with that one, the trust is built through building up the oxytocin. You can't really do trust, do you know what I mean?
Right.
Trust really has to be earned and it has to be maintained, and it can be lost so easily. So I would say you can't say like, oh, you know, well, I did actually say to you before this, I trust you, but I can't say, Lisa, you have to trust me. That's not going to work. I have to demonstrate to you that I am trustworthy for you. And then that will start to build your oxytocin levels every time you see me or speak to me. And
Very
that's, you know,
cool.
something that's built over time. But the physical contact, that does induce little bursts of oxytocin as you go along.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you laid out all the things that I kind of think in my head is like the anti-oxytocin things.
Yeah.
So contempt, resentment, things like that. What are the acts that people do that maybe they don't realize are actually blocking the oxytocin?
So interestingly, in like large pieces of research, the one that they've narrowed it down to that is the most damaging in a relationship is a contemptuous facial expression. So obviously you can't unhear words that your partner has said to you, but you can kind of talk through that and maybe come to a different understanding sometimes, but words can be very hurtful and damaging. But there are certain facial expressions that if you see your partner make them, it's very difficult to ever get over, especially because if you, let's say, even just you perceive that your partner has looked at you with contempt or disgust, you may or may not be correct, because you'll be looking through your filters, which, you know, goodness knows what childhood and parental and societal and school programming have built up in your mind about what you perceive as contempt. Let's say they even did look at you like that. Imagine going to your partner and saying, the last time we had an argument, I think you looked at me with disgust. The most likely response you're going to get is, no, I didn't. So how do you actually ever both agree on that? It's really difficult. Whereas if you had said something like, you know, I really hate it when you do X, you can actually talk through that. So these, and often it's micromuscular changes in the person's face. It's just a narrowing of the eyes or a kind of, looking down their nose at you kind of thing. It's so subtle that it's very difficult to prove that it was done or understand the intent of the person that might have made that face. And also, just, what I sometimes bear in mind, that sometimes people's, just face at rest without them really thinking of any emotion could be enough of a trigger to someone that, I felt like you thought badly of me when you were looking at me that day. And, it's just two different people's perspectives.
So, so you said a couple of the things that are signs, I guess, of contempt. Looking down your nose. I assume when people like a tut. And there's a whole study. Have you heard of the Gottman Institute? Did that one study where they turned off the volume, and they had these couples walk into the room, and they would just watch them, and they would see their body language. And because contempt is like one of the biggest signs of a divorce, they could accurately detect, I think with 90% accuracy, of who was going to get divorced just by the way that their facial structure was, because they could sense contempt.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like the darting of the eyes, or the roll, I should say the rolling of the eyes.
Yeah, rolling of the eyes, like ignoring, walking past, brushing off, so many little things. And interestingly, I've never really thought about why this is the case before, but it's very small things. So it's kind of like microaggressions, and you can get 10 of those without really being conscious that that's going on till it reaches some kind of tipping point. Whereas, obviously if there's like domestic abuse or violence, you are aware of it. You may not necessarily respond to it in the way that people would expect you to, and that's for all sorts of complex reasons. But these more subtle micro aggressions are their own thing in a different way.
Really?
So talk to me about stress, because I've heard you talk that stress, when it's something that you do together and you come through the stress together, actually that can be a bonding mechanism. But stress in and of itself can actually be something that can potentially break a relationship.
Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me of that, because how you were saying, like, if you go through something really intense together, like whether it's laughing together or just an intense experience, that can bond you. So that can actually be a bad experience, I guess, like we said with the horror movie, but not necessarily bad, but stressful.
Yeah.
Like if you do a bungee jump together, the fear and apprehension that you have around that can really bond you. And again, I use reality shows as an example because they are basically a psychological playground. I mean, I watch them because it's like
that's what you tell people. That's why I watch them. It's all for work.
People are always so surprised that I watch them. And then I basically say it's like sociology and psychology experiments. But often when people go through, whether it's Love Island or I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, it's an intense experience that can't be shared with many others. You always hear people at the end saying, we're going to be friends for life. And, whether or not that turns out to be true, it's the feeling of that shared intense experience that makes people think that that is true. So that can be a negative thing where you were all in fear, but you were in it together. But then terrible, terrible tragedies like the loss of a child increases the chances of a couple getting divorced by a massive amount.
Really?
And that is because the research talks about the male and female journey, but just let's say it's the journey of two people who process their emotions differently, means that if you're suffering in grief or stress or loss or scarcity, that let's say it was you and I, and it's just friends, that if I process that really differently emotionally and you're going on your journey with the same thing that we've both experienced, it's really hard to be there for each other. Because not only are you already struggling with your own emotions, but if they're very different to your friends or your partners, then it's hard for you to put yourself in their position. You know that phrase, put yourself in their shoes? I always say put yourself in their brain. But that's hard to do. Like it's hard to do at the best of times. It's really hard to do if you're compromised by stress. Because when you are stressed, we go at the other end from oxytocin, so then we have this hormone cortisol. And one of the ways that cortisol helps you to get through stress is it changes where the blood flow in your brain goes. So it brings it down to just survival mode, like what do I need to do today to just get through this day, minimum. It doesn't allow the blood to flow to the parts of your brain that allow you to be creative or think flexibly or think out of the box. So it just really shuts down your thinking when you need it the most. And that's why it's important to like be mindful of like keeping up your resilience and doing things like journaling and mindfulness, which we can come to later. Yeah.
That's why I was actually, as you were talking, I thought, wow, it would really be difficult if you were in a relationship with somebody and you're the person that is trying to be mindful, trying to work on yourself, really trying to be present, and your partner isn't. And so your development of, I assume then, the cortisol, as you're trying to kind of lower it, if your partner isn't, then now you don't become aligned. And I always wondered about the child thing. Like, I couldn't imagine a worse feeling than losing a child. But I always wondered why it never brought people together, because I'm like, wow, this is something you're both suffering with. How come you don't bond? Like, obviously, it's a horrible way to bond, but you would, from the outside, not understanding, you know, the neuroscience behind it, is I would assume that would bring you together, not tear you apart.
I'm really glad that you said that you've kind of seen that anecdotally as well, because it does seem odd. You'd think that all you'd want to do is cling to each other, but I think that the grief is so overwhelming that it's very hard to think of anyone else, you know, temporarily. And maybe by the time you come up for air, you've drifted apart so much that it's really difficult to reconnect. The scary thing about cortisol is that it's not like oxytocin. It doesn't depend on actually doing something like hugging you or holding you or kissing you. It is like other sex steroid hormones like estrogen and progesterone. It actually leaks out of your body through your sweat. So if you are in close proximity to somebody who's really stressed, whether they're repressing it or not, that is going to artificially raise your stress levels.
How is that possible?
It's possible in the same way that women who live or work closely together synchronize their periods.
Right.
And that's so quick.
Straight
that
up.
Evolution. We needed to be fertile at the same
Like
time.
the opal stone gets women pregnant. It's a real fucking thing.
In this day and age.
Fucking crazy.
And so with stress,
Hippy dippy voodoo magic shit.
Stress should impact other people, because let's say you're at war or you're out hunting, you needed to know what the leader was feeling so you could respond to that. And we're talking about times where people couldn't speak yet. So it was grunting, gesturing, but it was also like relating to each other hormonally. And that doesn't matter if you're male or female. It's who's more senior in the pack or the pair, their stress levels.
But honestly, if you're one of these language people that are making a fucking big fuss, you are a failed prototype. You and fucking Neanderthals are trying to fucking communicate.
The impact of the language that you can use, and so if you're the type of person that uses a language that is maybe different to your partner's, even the language you use in your mind, I assume it will have a different effect. And the example that you gave was the people that read words around retirement end up moving slower. Talk to me about that, because I found this fascinating. And again, always going back to how that, like, we don't realize the words that we're maybe using. And so when it comes to, especially my audience, if you've been in a relationship, or if you've been heartbroken, or if something bad has happened in that way, the value tagging, as you call it, attachment to maybe these words of I'm no good, or I was, you know, this was my fault, can actually have a massive detriment to them potentially. And this is my language, but potentially
but it was my fault
later because you're so stuck.
So that was just an experiment that was done on medical students, so healthy young people. They had to walk between 5 rooms.
People that are close to me about my choice in partners.
5 words on them.
So I picked somebody that
and they had to string a sentence
I knew everyone was gonna fucking get off my back about. And I loved them so much, and I was like, well then you guys should be dating.
Words. One of the rooms had bungalow, walk, Florida, sunshine, beach. Now, if you're American, those words will tag in your brain as something to do with becoming retired. Really loose association, but there nonetheless. And so, even though they entered the rooms in different orders because they were all going around in a circle, 80% of them walked more slowly out of that room than any of the other rooms, just because they were vaguely reminded of
Please let me die.
Environment.
I choose death.
So I want to apply that to how that, could affect us. And that is both if you are constantly saying, I'm not good enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not clever enough, I'm never going to get that done. If that's your internal narrative, just ask yourself now, you don't need a neuroscience to tell you, what is that doing to your body?
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now. How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside.
Yeah, that's so. And talk to me about the value tagging that you, because this is again so powerful.
So value tagging is based on the fact that we are bombarded with so much information every day that we have to naturally filter some of that out. So for example, you're not aware of the clothes on your body all day, even though you have like millions of receptors in your skin to feel stuff. So we filter that out because it's not useful information for us during the day. And so there's selective filtering. Then there's something called selective attention, which means that the brain directs us to things that are of interest to us, like surviving and thriving in life. And value tagging sits behind that and tags, in order of importance, the things that it wants us to attend to. And there's 2 systems within that. One is logical. So that's literally, don't like step into the road without seeing if the car's coming, literal like danger to your life, yeah. And then there's the
Which your kids can't do anymore.
or emotional part, which is the things that you really want in your life, whether that is a partner or a family or travel or, be your own boss kind of thing. The things that mean something to you deep down and longer term, which naturally we don't attend to every day because we're busy. So, it's sort of what we have to do is ramp up the importance of that emotional stuff and not just be living on this is what I need to do to survive today. But when I talk about distractions, I want to add in another one that relates back to the language thing that you mentioned, which is we all have our own internal narrative, and we may have people, be our cheerleaders or criticize us, and we may be very conscious of being able to respond to that. But this is where gaslighting and microaggressions come in, which is people just making snidey little comments that maybe it takes you a bit of time to realize that actually that's chipping away at my self-esteem. So again, if you think about the impact of mind over matter, if somebody says to you every day, Lisa, you look really good considering that you put on a bit of weight since last year, that you're looking really good, what's that doing to your body already? Did you feel something? Yeah. And that's like so scary, and it's obviously not true at all.
No, I don't think you personally.
But I said it without warning you because it makes people shudder, because you immediately think, is that actually true? Have I put on weight since last year? And even if you can very quickly come to the conclusion that it's not true, it's already done some damage.
God, this is so powerful. I'd love to even go a bit deeper. So a lot of my audience, they'll write in the comments a lot of the time, especially when I talk about relationships, like, well, I'm just not going to have a relationship. Guys are terrible. There's no good men out there.
Not
giving
true.
up on love because I was hurt before, which I completely
By one
understand.
raised by
Why
lesbians.
People shut down as a protective mechanism. But explain to me what that's actually doing to the brain in everything that we're talking about with the language that we speak and then the value tagging.
Yeah, so like you, I also think it's perfectly natural to feel like that after the breakdown of a relationship. But what we need to be mindful of doing is not letting that last forever. Because of course we're going to protect ourselves if we've just had our hearts broken. But the way that I work with people is with those statements, when they're ready, not like straight after a heartbreak, is I ask them to not justify it to me, but to go home and ask yourself, are those statements actual 100% fact? Is it actually true that there is not a single good man out there? Is it actually true that all men are awful?
Nope.
Is it actually true that
all men only think about sex?
au volant du Niro EV avec la
Turns out, no.
qui préserve la batterie et optimise son autonomie. Le Kia Niro EV, disponible maintenant. Kia, du mouvement vient l'inspiration.
that if you ever dared to open up your heart again, the only outcome is that it would get broken? If you really think about it, the answers to those questions are no. So then you have to make a decision that, okay, everything that's happened to me in my life so far has put me in this place where I don't want to risk getting married again, and because I don't want to get hurt again. And I have seen several examples of men that have treated myself or other women badly, and that's, you know, the data that I'm basing this statement on. So what you need to do is, first of all, decide if, because of all those reasons, you really want to be on your own for the rest of your life, and whether that's actually likely. One of my kind of much older mentor friends said to me when I once said to him, you know, I'm just not interested in having a relationship again. And he said, the problem is, Tara, men will still be interested in you. And I never forgot that. So, you know, to also ask yourself that however much you're saying, I'm never going to like trust someone again or be in a relationship again, chances are, you know, I guess depending slightly on how old you are, that someone's going to come along who's really sweet and really nice and really genuine and hasn't had that backstory and just wants to give it a go. Then you need to collect data to the contrary of what you've made yourself believe. So look around, you know, even if you've had a really bad experience, and some of your girlfriends have, you must have friends who are happily married, or, you know, have had a heartbreak and then found somebody really lovely. Or, you know, even in the absence of finding a partner, just being able to work on themselves and get themselves back to that place of, my heart's open now, even though I never thought it would be again. So gathering evidence that is positive for you. And I think, again, not what you have to say to your friends or justify to your family, but, you know, deep down, if you would love to be in partnership again, then just for yourself, gather evidence that that's possible.
And work on
Once you believe
making
it's possible,
you the person you want to
everything
be.
else will start to change. You don't actually have to do anything that different.
Yeah.
You don't have to go on 100 dates. You don't have to tell everyone that you're looking for someone. You know, if you do that internal work, things will shift in the world around you.
I love that so much. And
No, he
also
ran
say
up
that,
to
like,
me
it
and
becomes a
he
self-fulfilling prophecy. Explain that.
told me, I think I'm in love with you.
What we
I was
don't
like,
believe is
I
possible
don't think we've even had a
doesn't tend to
conversation
happen.
ever.
The most classic example of this is a tangible one. It's not like a love one. It's a human
And he
being able
was
to
just
run
like,
a 4-minute mile.
oh, just you
We
watch, I'm gonna
literally
make you
did
fall in
not
love
think
with
that
me.
was possible. That, you know, there was a time within which the
I
fastest
was like, don't you have a
man
girlfriend? He's like, yeah, I
on
do.
Earth could
I'm
run
gonna go fix
a
it right
mile,
now. I'll
and
be
it
right
was
back. And he
over
left.
4 minutes. And for all sorts of, you know, whatever the apparatus was
So
that
he
you
came
had
back
at
and he was
the
like,
time,
all right.
physiologically, it was believed that it's impossible for a human to run a mile in less than 4 minutes.
I felt
And then
so
Roger
bad.
Bannister
I was
famously
like,
ran a mile in less than 4 minutes.
please
Well,
don't
within
say
2 or
you
3
just
months
went
of
and broke
that,
up your
7 or 8 other
girlfriend
people
because
suddenly
you
did it,
wanted to
having
get my
like no
pants
one else has
because
ever done it in the world before.
I would have
So
said
it's
no.
once we knew it was possible, I don't know if people actually did things differently or they just went out there thinking that it's possible and they ran and it happened. But let's just like bring that back to the example that we're giving, which is that you've been through heartbreak that makes you feel like you just never ever want to let anybody let you feel like that again. So you are going to be closed, protective, you know, not take up opportunities. What if you can give yourself enough examples of friends, or maybe not even people you know, but just like, you know, high profile people or stories that you've heard of people who have overcome that and then been really happy afterwards? What's the danger of showing yourself as many examples of that as the bad examples that you've got?
And I actually have a quote of yours. You meet people at the level of psychological wound that you have. And is that kind of like what we're talking about here? Was if you're
So the belief, totally get it, but then also if there's a wound that maybe you don't actually work through, then you're attracting other people that have that similar type of belief.
And the way that that manifests is that you'll really get each other because you'll be coming from a very same story, very same, similar narrative and filters in life. Somebody who's very whole, who's evolved spiritually, who's worked on themselves, who's done that psychological stuff to manage their emotions, isn't going to be in a relationship with somebody who's got trust issues.
Le défi de hockey de la LNH de Tim est de retour.
Qui je choisis pour la game de ce soir? Ah, lui, il a une tête de gagnant, comme moi. Je sais même pas lancer, là. Faut que ça continue. Jouez de thé maintenant.
That doesn't happen. You meet people who are at a similar level to you. Interestingly, since I made that quote, somebody wrote on social media, I guess you leave people for the same reasons. And that hit me like, wow, that is profound. And it's so true. So I don't know, I can't remember the name of who that was, but if you're listening, thank you. So yeah, if you are in partnership or in friendship or in a group, and you start doing that work and evolving emotionally and spiritually, chances are you will lose some friends and maybe even lose your partner. But you've got to be able to think of that as a good thing.
Yeah. I read a study once that said, I think it was Forbes, that said there's something called divorce contagion. And if your friend has got divorced or someone that you know has got divorced, there's 75% more likely to also get divorced.
Yeah.
Explain that to me because I don't quite understand it.
Okay, so it's actually under an umbrella of something called social contagion, which is that things that your peers do impact you. So it's not literally like, oh, Jane got divorced, so I'm going to get divorced.
Right.
It's if there were underlying problems in your marriage, but nobody in your social group's divorced, you're going to just bury it and keep going, right? As soon as somebody else gets divorced, you might think, well, actually, they've been brave to leave their marriage, and my marriage isn't really, as great as I say it is when we're all out to dinner together. And you look at this person and you see them, be brave, move on, maybe meet somebody, that's more on their level, and that makes you think that that could be the outcome for you. And it, absolutely doesn't have to include them meeting someone else. It could just be that not being in that relationship is better for them. And if you identify with that, it might just give you the confidence and the courage to make that step that you wouldn't have made. So it probably usually takes somebody who cannot tolerate being in their relationship anymore to give permission almost for people who kind of on the fence to say, actually, I think it might be better for me to leave this marriage. And so weight is another one. I mean, you rarely see a group of friends where, everybody's kind of at a average weight and one person's really obese or one person's like super skinny, or vice versa. You rarely see a group of friends who are all overweight with one friend who's of, average weight. So what tends to happen is that if you feel a bit of societal pressure to stay in a certain shape because of the people that you hang around with, if they all start putting on weight, then it's kind of okay for you to. And, most people put on weight in the pandemic, right? And there was a definite kind of camaraderie from saying, oh my goodness, I put on so much weight because of like the stress, or because we're eating like, so well at home, or, we're eating more junk, or whatever it was. People could connect with each other because a lot of people put on weight during the pandemic. And there would definitely be groups of friends that once that was, behind us to whatever extent it is, would just say, well, this is the weight I am now. And they'd all say, yeah, me too. That's not going to change now at our age. But I was definitely in the group of friends that were all like, we need to get back to our pre-pandemic weight, So of course you're influenced by the people around you, because if nobody else around me said, I want to get back to my pre-pandemic weight, maybe I would have let it slide. I don't know. But I wasn't in that group. So for me, that didn't happen. But for a lot of people, it would have.
Yeah, I can also understand though, like if you're with a group of friends and let's say there's 5 of you and
everyone's getting a salad. Well, you're more likely to go for the healthy option than go, I'll have like the French fries and the, deep fried chicken. So that kind of habitual type thing when you're around other people, I can get. But the divorce thing really hit me, and I love how you broke that down in that it's giving you somewhat permission.
Yeah.
But my question now is, if you were around people that were truly in beautiful relationships, would that also have that same effect on you?
Yeah. So if that's what you see, and a lot of people say, my parents were married forever and they really loved each other, and so that's their model of what a relationship should be. And equally, you see, I hear this more in the younger age group now, that all my friends' parents are divorced, so that obviously normalizes divorce. Doesn't mean that you think it's a good thing to either stay together forever or get divorced. It's just what's normal for you. So if you see most of your friends making choices of somebody that is loyal, that is family focused, that is dependable and faithful, then you're much more likely to make that. But if you're seeing, if it's like, oh, I like a bad boy, the most important thing to me is that he's really good looking, then you're probably going, you're not going to want to have the ugliest boyfriend of your whole group, are you? You're going to want that type.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And would the same then apply if you were single and just hanging around single people?
It definitely normalizes it. So it doesn't mean at all that you can't meet someone, but it makes it easier to stay single for sure, because you don't feel like the odd one out. And of course, what happens within that is that, and I think this is an understandable narrative, but a lot of people will say, well, I'm perfectly happy being single. I don't want to compromise the things that are really important to me for someone else. And so, what I've kind of always tried to do as a bit kind of to give people permission is, at the times that I have been single, is to say, I'd actually really love to be in partnership again. And I find that every single time I say that, the person who's just said, well, I'm fine being single, says, actually, yeah, I would too. So it's quite interesting. I think there's a lot of, we do have to put on a lot of bravado, because I still think society judges you for being single. So if you are, even if deep down you don't want to be, it's like, it feels like you have to justify that you're fine with it. And it's not actually what you want. And, there are so many jokes about people saying, all my parents wanted for me to get married and have children and settle down. And that's not actually what's most important to me, because I love my career or whatever. But I think if you can be really honest with your friends and say, it's great to have a wonderful career and you can have both, and maybe you would love, to get the benefits of being in a relationship too, then I think, people are really honest. I think it's kind of like fear and shame that makes us say that we don't. And obviously there are people that don't want to be in a relationship, but I think there are a lot of people that do, that find it hard to admit that they want that when they don't have it.
Yeah, it seems like it's definitely a protective mechanism, which I completely get, especially if you've been hurt before and you can't imagine ever, giving yourself over to somebody again. But going back to the thing that we were saying earlier, if you deep down do want to, and again, zero judgment if you don't, like respect that you know what you want, but if deep down you do, but you're saying you don't, now I can imagine there's a disconnect between basically the brain and the heart.
And that's such a sweet way of putting it, yeah. And I think the way that I would put it is that this can change for people at different times. So if I even think of my own story, I was, married for about 10 years, got divorced in my mid-30s, and definitely said I will never, ever, ever get married again.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. But I didn't want to feel like that again, that disappointment and that loss, and there is a bit of shame associated with it. But it was mostly for myself, the completely broken heart. I just never, ever wanted to go through that again. So I did date, but I didn't give my heart to anyone. And then I remember when I met my second husband, I remember the moment I was standing in the garden that I thought, this person could totally break my heart now. And instead of feeling fear, I thought, wow, you have got over what happened before and brought yourself to the place where you've put your heart on a plate for someone else again, well done.
What did you end up doing to be able to go from heartbroken to be able to put your heart on a plate again?
Well, it took a lot of time, but I really did delve into the spiritual work. So for me, I became very interested in Buddhist teachings and Jungian psychology. And, you know, I don't know why I went down with a rabbit hole with those two things particularly at that time, but I did. And I think, you know, that at any time or for any person, it could be another form of psychology or manifestation or another like spiritual philosophy, whatever works for you. And yeah, so I just really worked on myself, and based on, you know, what we were discussing earlier, which is you're going to meet someone at the level of psychological wound that you're at. I was
Donnez votre vieux véhicule au programme Tourin. Ça peut changer la vie de personnes souffrant de maladies rénales. Le remorquage est gratuit et vous recevrez un reçu fiscal.
wasn't doing it to meet someone. I was doing it to build myself back up again because, you know, I had got married quite young, so my sense of identity of who I was, you know, not in partnership with my first husband was, I didn't really like know what it was. So I had to just kind of like get a really good sense of who I was again. And around that same time, I also quit my job as a medical doctor and started up my business and moved countries. So there was a lot going on. So I did need to like really like gather myself together and be like, okay, you know, this is a whole new big start. How do you want this to pan out? Who do you want to be? Like, what's going to make you proud of yourself? And because I did that, I got myself to the place where I was like, the way I'll put it, I was somebody that someone would want to marry. I wasn't that before. You know, it was like along the way, several times, because I've got really good friends, I was like, would I want to marry me right now? No.
That's a strong question to ask yourself.
Yeah.
How were you able to say no without eroding your self-esteem?
Well, you
self-esteem
shouldn't
was
have.
where it was. I was just being honest.
Yeah.
It was literally, would I, you know, am I marriage material? Am I like a great catch right now for someone or for myself? Like if I met somebody that was like me right now, would I think I want to spend the rest of my life with this person and they'll always have my back and be my best friend? I knew I wasn't capable of that at that time. So, and I didn't want to do it for someone else. I wanted to do it for myself. So I had self-esteem. And it was only when I had self-esteem that I actually met someone else.
As a neuroscientist, I really want to understand addiction. And addiction in there, you didn't expect that one, did you? Well, it's actually very much connected because there's a lot of people that I know, especially when I was younger, that were addicted to to the drama of a relationship, and it becomes like this toxic cycle that you're in. But even when it had nothing to do with abuse, so it wasn't like they couldn't physically leave, but they just became addicted to the highs and the lows. And I've heard so many, or I've seen so many relationships where people like, they're screaming at each other, yelling, mad, hatred, and the next thing they're doing is having crazy ass sex. So what's happening to the brain? Why do people get addicted to that type of cycle?
I think a message that I really want to put across quite strongly is related to what I said earlier about it took me quite a lot of time, is that age does play a part in it. So the way that our brains develop is from 0 to 2, obviously a baby goes from being completely helpless, can't control its own bladder or bowels or anything, feed itself, to walking, talking, sometimes up to 5 languages at a time, can, you know, make choices, eat, go to the loo. And then from 2 till, let's say, teenage, that, you know, it just grows and becomes more cemented and you become like more solid at everything. And then around the teenage years, there's a lot of pruning away of pathways that you don't need anymore, like maybe you're not using all of those languages, or you know you don't need to like remember how to potty train anymore, and you start to learn how to socialize, how to be in relationship, how to experience your emotions. But that's very active until we're about 25, and I think people really don't realize that. They think you're 18, you're an adult, behave yourself now. But actually we're very volatile emotionally till we're at least 25. And then depending on the kind of family you grew up in, you know, if it was a family with high expressed emotion, so a lot of like raising of voices or crying or throwing yourself to the ground or, you know, just kind of gesticulating and kind of not having boundaries, then it's going to be harder for you to rein that in. This, what you call addiction to the highs and lows, I would actually say is an inability to manage the extremes of your emotion. Over time, therefore with age, is that you need to manage the range of your emotions. If you can be like screaming and hating one second and like, you know, having crazy sex the next, that's because your range is out here. If you can bring your range, like, and however good it gets, it's going to get that bad. That's what you need to understand. So I'm not saying that you can't have good sex, but, you know, if you can have that within, you know, either a trusting relationship or an absolutely transparent, you know, just, you know, casual relationship, and you hold your self-esteem within that, you understand what the expectations are, then at the other end, you're not going to have the fall off the cliff, heartbreak, kind of.
A photo is just a photo until it isn't. So give inspiration. Give more and more and more. Instead.
Kind of like, you know, wanting to crazily hate and stalk that person, you're going to be like, you know what, I kind of wish that turned out differently, but it didn't, but I can be okay with that. I'm probably going to go into a corner and like lick my wounds for a while, but I'll come back okay. And it's not even, that's an example, but with emotions, it's like how happy and excited you feel. That's also how sad you're going to feel if something goes wrong. And what we don't want is to be here and not
completely
no. But we equally don't want to be out there. There's a normal range for human emotions where the hormones and transmitters are, you know, within the normal range of chemicals, and we experience emotions in a healthy way, and that involves both survival emotions and bonding emotions or attachment emotions. So we experience the whole spectrum, but just not too much or too little, if any of them.
Thank you for correcting me. I never thought of it. It seems like it seems from the outside and not understanding, you know, the brain, that it was more of an addiction. But I totally understand the spectrum of things. And then you actually mentioned where like you go into the stalking mode. I've seen amazing, well put together women go off the rails if they've been heartbroken and all of a sudden they're stalking or they're doing, I call them drive-bys, where it's like, I'm just gonna see if his car's there. Or if they're in a relationship and they're worried about if they're cheating and then all of a sudden they become a different person. What actually is happening there?
That is to do with psychological safety. Well, I have to separate the two, because if you're in a relationship and you have suspicions, then what you're doing is to maintain your psychological safety, to like give yourself data and evidence about whether you should trust that person or not. The one about after a relationship has broken down would be more about the inability to accept that fact, the inability to regulate your emotions around it, and therefore difficulty letting go. So I think they're definitely in a subset of things together, but they're slightly different. So one is to do with not being able to let go. And the other one perhaps is more to do with being able to let go if you get the right evidence. So it's checking, should I let go? And it may be followed by the former state, in that if you do have to end the relationship because of trust issues, you would still be heartbroken. And you might still want to go and check if their car's there or someone else's car is there. But I think they've got slightly different motivations in the brain. And it kind of, you know, it makes sense, because if you've been in a relationship with someone, you've either lived with them or spent a lot of time with them, and suddenly that changes, it destabilizes your whole just day-to-day, you know, from the minute that you wake up, because either you've gone from waking up with that person to waking up alone, or you've gone from waking up thinking, I might see him this weekend, to I'm never going to see him again. So it's actually okay to have those temporary periods of not being yourself and kind of losing your ability to behave in the way that you normally do, but it just can't go on for too long. And I remember, you know, when I was like first getting divorced, and because I was a psychiatrist at the time, and I'd had patients on the ward who had like tried to kill themselves because their relationship had ended. I remember thinking, if I didn't know all the things that I know now, I can see why you could end up on a psychiatric ward. So it's very interesting that I've, seen kind of the most broken result of a relationship ending or cheating happening, and been through a version of that myself and really understood like how that can happen. But thank goodness had the emotional regulation to like not go down that path. But it really made me actually so non-judgmental about how difficult that is, and how if you don't have the tools within yourself or the right support around you, it can spiral out of control. I think that even in terms of like time bound, that even like very, very supportive friends will let you have that period of time where you're just like crying and talking about it all the time and wanting to message him or whatever. But there is going to come a time where people are going to say, you know what, you're better than this. Like, you can start to move forward now. Other people will like be so keen to be with you, and that's what that support circle helps. And so, I really feel for people that don't have that, because it's very hard to navigate all these things by ourselves. We, as humans, aren't meant to deal with these things by ourselves. We're meant to be part of a tribe.
So is it prêt pour un été WAC? Un été épique, rempli d'aventures excitantes, avec le meilleur allié possible. Parce que le voyage fait aussi partie de l'aventure. Et que Hyundai nous propose les VUS les mieux équipés pour en profiter pleinement. Et chez Hyundai, le WAC, c'est notre raison d'être. Having people around you that can help you get out of that, and then also having the ability to emotionally regulate.
Yeah, so absolutely, building up yourself the like emotional regulation, and that can happen through journaling, through therapy, through talking with friends, through like introspection. But the circle that you have around you, bring it back to everything else that you've picked up today. The words that people say, the examples that they give you. If you have friends around you that are saying, yeah, well, why not just like text him and see if he replies, versus friends who are saying like, you know what, it's time to put this behind you. And there's a time and a place for both of those, but it's just being very conscious that you've got the right advice around you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that all, because I think that so many of us will beat ourselves up over an action where it may not align with the person that we want to be. And so that can trigger, the shame. It's like, I can't believe I acted like that. And then that shame then can just spiral down, instead of giving yourself the grace that's like, yes, this is actually a moment in time. I'm having an emotion. This is very valid. This is very reasonable. I won't stay here. But right now, not to feel the shame, and that you're just freaking human.
Yeah, I think thinking of it as temporary. You just made me think of a really funny analogy. I don't know why, but I was like, that's breakup Barbie. Breakup Barbie can be in your life for a certain period of time, but not forever.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. And you actually also mentioned the psychological trust. So talk to me about the power of trust, and actually the connection of trust and being able to orgasm.
So that phrase is called psychological safety, and it comes from how we existed in tribes when we lived in the cave. So when we lived in the cave, if you mistakenly let someone else into your tribe, that could bring in disease. It could lead to like theft. It was a risk. So we had to like keep our tribes like together and separate from different tribes. And in those days, the way that we recognized our tribe was through skin color, hair texture, eye color, and eye shape mostly. So it's very racial, right? So these days it's not based on that, although that is still a part of it. But when we meet a new person, we actually peg them on up to 150 identified stereotypes.
Whoa!
And that will now, in the modern world, include things like social class, how much you earn, educational level,
what you're wearing,
which sports team you support, which political party you vote for, physical attractiveness, and like many other, and obvious things like age and gender and race, so it doesn't mean you have to be the same to be in the tribe, but you'll make a picture of someone and think, okay, this is someone who's about the same age as me, who's a woman that comes from London. See where I'm going? You're in my trap. So the safety issue came from the fact that you had to stick together as a tribe to be safe, and any external element was a potential danger. So now it's based on a wider range of stereotypes. So even if you don't match on those stereotypes, once you've become in partnership or in tribe or whatever, there is a level of trust, okay? And it's not just in relationships, it's losing your job is a psychological safety factor, because obviously that's what you rely on to pay for your life. So your relationship with your boss, your relationship with your team. Our brain is constantly looking out for threats to our survival. That is its main job. It wants us to live long enough to reproduce.
That's why my work was the first time I got bullied.
And so
No
to
shit,
achieve that, we have to sleep,
because
eat,
like in
be
my brain, if
hydrated,
you're working together,
be
you're on a
healthy,
team
be
together.
fertile.
And it
That's
didn't
all our
occur to
brains
me
actually
that
care
like
about. That's how
they could be
basic
the ones
we
who are
actually
trying to
are.
fuck me over.
But we are living a richer life than that. But in terms of what the brain is doing, its main job is there a threat to my survival right now? When I meet a new person, could this person like somehow threaten my survival? As soon as I've decided that that's not the case, then I can think about, okay, do I want to trust you? Do I want to be friends with you? Do I want to like bring you into my circle? So that's what psychological safety is. And then bringing...
Découvrez la nouvelle carte de crédit Tim du programme Finance Tim, qui récompense vos achats du quotidien. Partout où vous magasinez. Demandez la carte de crédit Tim seulement via l'appli Tim. Les conditions s'appliquent.
In trust and orgasm. So obviously you can have an orgasm with somebody that you don't necessarily know if you can trust, because you can have a one-night stand.
I cannot.
But oxytocin does underlie both love and trust, and orgasm, childbirth, breastfeeding. So hormones and neurotransmitters have more than one, they can underlie more than one pathway. So for example, dopamine, which most people will recognize as the reward chemical, so that's released when you get something that you like.
So like eating a bowl of ice cream.
Yeah. Also underlies motivation. So it's the hormone that will drive you to move towards a goal that you want to achieve.
I'm really excited about the
But
ice
it's
cream.
also very much part of the movement system. So in different pathways of the brain, dopamine is doing different things. So let me just give you some really tangible examples. So when dopamine is reduced in a certain pathway in the brain, that's when you can see symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's disease is a movement disorder. That's what I did my PhD in. And it's reduction of dopamine in the nigrostriatal pathway of the brain. In schizophrenia, you have an increase in dopamine in the mesolimbic pathway of the brain. So forget the terms necessarily, but they're just in different places in the brain, same hormone going up or down. So with oxytocin, when it's underlying an orgasm, it's working differently to how it does when it's underlying breastfeeding or childbirth or trust, or obviously love and orgasm tend to be more connected. But yeah, so just there's so many systems and subsystems in the brain, and they've got all sorts of different chemicals like racing around in them. We try to simplify it by saying oxytocin is for bonding, but it's actually way more complicated. It would go on to say that you're much more likely to have more orgasms and better orgasms, certainly as a woman, if you're in a trusting relationship, than if you are having serial non-trusting relationships.
Yes, thank you, because I've spoken about this, behind the scenes with a lot of my girlfriends, and we've all spoken about the second that we have the trust, it's like multiple orgasms. I was with a guy before my husband, and I didn't orgasm once, and now my husband is like, a lot. So I've just spoken to a lot of women, and I had no idea why, and I couldn't, I do kind of the safety element, I think, is a big deal because especially as a woman, you're giving yourself over so completely that you are leaving yourself completely susceptible to so much. But I didn't understand what actually was happening in the body or the brain for that to be true.
And look, let's be realistic, because I think people will comment on this if we don't, which is that it's perfectly possible to have an amazing orgasm or multiple orgasms with a complete stranger. It is possible. But in terms of evolutionary wiring and long-term satisfaction, it's just a different, it's like watching an advert instead of watching a movie. I just made that up.
That was
good. You made that up.
That was good. I am so obsessed with understanding the brain and evolution because anytime I'm going to go to myself, anytime I don't understand myself, why am I doing this? Why am I acting like it doesn't serve me? I go back to, it must be an evolution. Something's happened back in the caveman days that's led me to feeling like this. It's a different world, Lisa. Doesn't mean you should be like this. But at least once I understand where it comes from, it allows me to just take that and then go, cool, now I get it. Now how do I change? Because, if I want to try and be better, improve, and yeah, the orgasm thing was definitely one of the things that I was like, when you come on, I'm definitely on this one.
And can I just say something?
Please.
I know I'm the guest, but I think that soundbite from you of whenever I'm feeling a certain way, I go back to evolution and I say, Lisa, it's a different world now. What do I want to do with this? If that is the one thing that people take away from this conversation, I think that is potentially life-changing.
Wow. Coming from you, thank you. I think you dropped so many bombs in through it, but I appreciate that's very sweet. I want to go back to something you said earlier about if you've come from a family where you've seen divorce, then it lets you know that, divorce is okay.
Can I just caveat that slightly? So, not if that's very unusual. If
Avez-vous déjà eu des lentilles cornéennes si confortables que vous avez oublié que vous les portiez? Les lentilles cornéennes totales. Des lentilles cornéennes si confortables qu'on ne les sent pas du tout.
So what I actually said was that there's a younger generation now, and they say most of my friends' parents are divorced.
Yes.
So that's the fact that it's multiple cases. If you come from a divorce, of course, it's also normalized it for you. That if all of your friends' parents are still together, you're more likely to be traumatized by that than actually normalizing it. So you're potentially likely to say, I don't want to do what my parents did. I want to be like my friends' parents. So I think it's more to do with the number of cases with that.
Thank you for correcting
I
me.
do
I think
like
that's
my
actually
parents,
super
and I want to be like my
powerful, because
grandparents.
I came from divorced parents.
Okay.
But I'm 44, so back in the day, divorce wasn't common. I was the only kid in my entire school that I knew one other girl. She never knew her dad. But other than that, every other family was together. And so I remember when I met my husband, the one thing I was like, we don't even say the word divorce in the house. Like, we call it the D word, and it's kind of like Voldemort, where you just don't say it. You don't repeat it in the house, because we don't want to ever have that as look, again, if we were profoundly unhappy and we worked and we did everything we possibly could, we pride being happy as individuals. So yes, we would get divorced, but we never really talk about it because we don't ever want that to go into our conscious minds. So thank you so much for correcting that.
No.
And I've had actually, on that point, I have a very old friend who is actually a devout Catholic, so that's not really a word but she got into a really, really bad habit for a while of every time she had an argument with her husband saying we should get divorced. And they actually were on the brink of divorce. But I remember saying to her, you've got to stop saying that. Unless you mean it, you can't just be saying that every time you're having an argument. You can't be saying it to your own brain.
And it'll ruin him in his next relationship.
So I do think it is a word, and there are many words, but that is a word that one does have to be very careful.
Yeah, and then I assume, going back to something you said earlier, then also that threat, the fear, you're really kind of solidifying that, and that's not bringing you guys together. That's not creating a bond.
No, not at all. No, it's definitely not bringing people together. But I think also it becomes it can be weaponized as a word, and then it can be actually made really weak because it's used so much.
1,000%, yeah. The more you say it, the more it's like, heard you say it 30 times.
Yeah.
You're not really going to divorce me.
No.
So yeah, so not true. So I've heard you say pregnant mothers, if they're really stressed, then the child can have the stress hormone. I was wondering the same about if the mother is truly in love and has like the lovely, the hormones that, oh my God, this is my husband and I'm pregnant. Does that then impact the child as well? And the reason why I ask is going back to how was I born? Like I look at like when I had gut issues, I looked back at my ancestors and I was like, look at my mum's gut, look at my grandmother's gut, like how did that all happen? So that again, just so I can understand and then act in accordance. And so yeah, when I heard you say about the stress, I was like, oh, is it the same thing with love?
That is such a great question, but I need to break it down into about 4 or 5 parts.
Please do.
So I think what you're asking about involves epigenetics, generational trauma potentially, how the microbiome is passed from mother to child, what happens in utero, and how hormones transfer from the mother to the baby. So yeah, 5.
Let's do it, girl.
So I'll take them kind of like the shortest one first. So obviously the placenta is the blood supply for the baby, but the mother's blood is running through the placenta. So everything the mother eats, you know, let's again give a very tangible example to make it easy to understand. If the mother's a heroin addict, is the baby getting heroin?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So if the mother's stressed or the mother's in love, is the baby getting cortisol or oxytocin?
Yeah.
And what we do tend to see is even in very alpha women, they tend to become a lot more like cuddly and dependent on the husband when they're pregnant because they have so much oxytocin going around. So in the absence of stress, and let's be very clear, you cannot help what happened in your generations before you. You cannot necessarily help how stressed you feel when you're pregnant. So everything that I'm going to say is for you to have that awareness, like you mentioned about evolution, and then to give you tips and tools for what you can do about it. So yeah, this is the reason that people play like classical music to their baby and like go to like prenatal yoga classes and like massage their belly with oil and stuff like that. It's to induce all of that beautiful oxytocin and, you know, to be with the father of the baby or like other family members or close friends and like, you know, experience that joy of what's coming. All of that absolutely is inducing oxytocin, and baby's definitely going to feel that. And so, okay, how the gut microbiome passes from mother to baby. So your gut microbiome is partly genetic, so you will be getting it from your mother and your father. But in the birthing process, when the baby comes out of the birth canal, it swallows a lot of vaginal fluids. Also, if you've seen childbirth, I don't know if you have, but
not in real life, but
I have seen it in real life because when I was a medical student, you had to watch 5 and deliver 5. So there is quite a lot of mixing of feces at the birth canal. So the baby can swallow some of that too. That's actually a really good thing.
Oh.
Because that seeds the gut microbiome. And then breastfeeding, you also get immune cells from your mother's breast milk, which seeds your gut microbiome. So in fact, if you have a cesarean, they actually take fluids from the mother's birth canal and swab it into the eyes, nose and mouth of the baby to improve its immune function by seeding its microbiome. And before we had that practice,
I'm gonna
children
fucking
who
throw
were born
up.
through cesarean section or who
Okay,
weren't
did
breastfed
not need to
had,
know that.
the risk of you know, less strong immunity. So it's actually
Okay.
really important that happens. So if your mother's gut microbiome was compromised, or you had a cesarean birth and you didn't get swabbed with the mother's fluids, or you didn't get breastfed, that does have an impact on you in future. But again, that can be mitigated by a really good diet, by fermented foods, by probiotics, by reduction of stress and other healthy lifestyle factors. Everything that's good for you is good for your gut. So exercise, sleep, mindfulness, varied diet, hydration, etc.
What's then the impact on a microbiome and the love hormone, or how you feel when then bonding with people? Is that
That's a really good question. we normally answer that by talking about the effect of stress on the gut, right? So if you have high levels of, so the gut and the brain communicate with each other through the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve that goes from your brain to your gut, other nerves, hormones, cytokine messaging, which is other chemical messages that go into the blood and communicate between the gut and the brain. So if you're stressed, we know that it leads to things like bloating and leaky gut and potentially IBS, other autoimmune diseases, indigestion, reflux, etc. Change in bowel habit. If you're not stressed, so if we think of oxytocin and cortisol and seesaw, then usually they're kind of mutually exclusive of each other. So if you're not stressed, then maybe you're neutral. But if you're also happy and trusting and in love, then yeah, that's going to have a beneficial impact on your gut microbiome, your immunity, your skin, your hormones, everything. I mean, it's really, stress is bad for all of those things, and oxytocin is good for all of those things. And that's why the loneliness epidemic is such an issue, because it's not just that, I'm bored at the weekend. It's your immune function is affected, your gut microbiome is affected, your skin is affected, your sleep can be affected, and your longevity is affected.
Old people get old and they get put in a home
your
and
risk
left
of
there.
having a heart attack is higher if you're chronically lonely.
Yes,
crazy,
or it kills
yeah.
them. The sadness kills
So
them.
generational trauma and epigenetic trauma. So generational trauma refers to an incident that happened in a particular generation that then does have knock-on effects on future generations. So a group that was marginalized in a particular generation will tend to not only themselves have felt, but pass on more sort of
You mean like
psychosocially
the Native
things
Americans,
like
the
you're
blacks, the
marginalized, you're on the
Hispanics,
outside,
basically
you're
everyone
not
who's
part
not
of the
white.
tribe, you're
Oh,
alone.
wait, no, the Jews, right.
So those are emotions that get passed on. But epigenetic trauma is when something actually affected you physically, either very shortly prior to conception or in the first, second, or third trimester of pregnancy. And the biggest examples of this, and there's probably a bit of crossover between the two types of trauma,
Or
are
if you're given
Holocaust
the
survivors
fucking
and Dutch
vagina
famine
cancer
survivors,
vaccine, maybe.
and slavery is another example. The Vietnam War probably goes across both of those types of trauma. But with epigenetic trauma, it actually switches on or off certain genes. Most
Imagine
of the
that was
research has looked
actually
at
true.
stress
That's
and
why they
resilience. So
fucking
if your
switched off.
forefathers
Imagine that's why
went
they
through a
gave
very
all these
stressful
kids like these
period,
girls
this can
vaccines
either make you more
to stop their
anxious
reproductive
or more resilient, and that
fucking
can change in the next generation, then in the grandchildren,
process
and
for the next, or fuck it up for the next like
and it's
fucking
quite an emerging
decade,
field. It's a bit more established now, but we don't exactly know
so that they can bring in more
why
immigrants.
it can lead to a good or a bad outcome, and in which generation and why. But we know that there's all sorts of combinations and permutations. So basically, if, let's say, you're a great-grandchild of a Holocaust survivor, and your grandparents didn't have a very good diet, and your mum was stressed during pregnancy. I mean, you can see how there's all sorts of different, factors that can play into this. But also, what's going on in the household when the baby is in utero has much more of an effect than we ever thought before. And then, obviously, like the first few months and year of life, kind of what's going on in terms of stress and stuff. A lot of, my friends who've got young kids now say about the difference between their first child and their second child. How, they were so ill-equipped for, like, the sleeplessness and having this, like, vulnerable, new human in their life. And second time round, they're a lot more chilled, and just the difference.
Get a dog. Good practice.
And not just in terms of parenting, but for a lot of people, let's say in the last 5 to 10 years, we've all just understood a lot more about how to be healthy. So we may have changed a lot of our practices, and that may have been different for the first child than it is now for the second child. So it's really complex, and a lot of it is out of our hands, like it happened before. So the main thing to understand is that you can yourself and teach your child how to regulate your emotions better. That's mostly through mindfulness, but it's also through not having high expressed emotions in the household. A lot of immigrant families like yours and mine, a lot of high expressed emotion in the household. And
why is that? Because they've gone through so much hardship?
Yeah, usually, yeah. And it may be cultural. So Greek and Indian families tend to be quite expressive, like anyway, even if they've stayed in the home country. And then if you have, made a difficult immigration, it could have like added to that. And then, not being in a place where you have access to like the foods and the spices that are like good for your gut microbiome and, of your culture. Maybe to a certain extent, loss of language or having to speak another language. All those things are really stressful. So even as I'm saying those things, I'm just thinking it is so, so multifactorial, and there isn't like a human alive that could work all of those things out and try and do everything that you can to mitigate them. So it's really about being present and like in every minute decision of the day, trying to make the healthiest one or the best one, or making it for the right reasons at least, and understanding that you're going to make mistakes, but that's human, and that there's always something that you can do to lessen the consequence of that if you choose to.
Thank you so much for breaking that down. The reason, and I think I said this already, but the reason why that's so powerful is you even have people in the same family that think completely differently or act differently. One person has more trauma than the other, even if they have had somewhat of the same upbringing. And I think that there's so much complexity to everything that you just said, to the brain, to the microbiome, to everything, that first step is don't beat yourself up and don't shame yourself.
Yeah.
And again, if I understand, now I really do release the shame. Like, it's like, oh, well, it was my great-great-grandmother, and not to blame her, poor woman, but again, it just allows me to know, okay, this is just how you are, it's genetics, it's the microbiome, it's this will happen. Now, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to make sure this doesn't then become your destiny? Because I'm such a person of, I want the knowledge and I want to have my own power. I don't want to give my power away to circumstances. And so knowing it now gives me the foundation to be able to then go, okay, now how am I going to build a stronger house?
Yeah, and I think here I should probably mention the word neuroplasticity. So it's everything that you just said, but it's, people might listen to you and say, well, it's okay for Lisa to say that because, she's got her life sorted and she's got a lot of help around her. So she's got the luxury of maybe saying, I can think about how I, rethink my choices. But I want everyone to know that it's possible, and I want everyone to know how much potential they have in their brains. And it is this thing called neuroplasticity, which is the fact that the brain remains flexible throughout our lives. And so it is the reason that we can change the way that we think, the way that we behave, the things that we believe, the relationship patterns that we have at any age, at any stage of life, and with any mindset. So even if you are one of those skeptical people that thinks, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, or a leopard can't change its spots, or I'm not going to change now, this is the way that I've always been, please just take away, just put like a seed into your brain, this idea that actually you can change. I mean, it's the reason that I was telling you my podcast is called Reinvent Yourself with Dr. Tara, because you literally can change, you just have to want to. And there is this amazing ability of the brain to make new connections, overwrite old pathways, even to grow like baby cells into like fully formed cells and like create whole new pathways in your brain. And all of that underwrites your beliefs, your thoughts, and your actions. And those are the three things that make your life what it is, basically.
I love that you said that,